that is dead. He can take an old cold piece of clay, give it life and breath. Something that is dead, he can take an old cold piece of clay and give it life and breath. Oh, look at what the Lord can do. Something that is dead, he can take an old cold piece of clay and give it life and breath. Breath.
There's a road that I once traveled on, a broad and winding way. My hopes and dreams were made up of what I wanted for that day. But my heart was so empty and it seemed I could not feel, till I heard about a man one day who died on Calvary's hill. They say that he so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son to suffer on the cross for you and me. No greater love could just one man to give his life for all our sin and suffer all the pain and agony. He did it all that we might be set free. Searching for the answers and you don't know where to go, just remember Jesus knows your heart and that he loves you so. He will take away your sin and pain and cast them far away, and he will come into your life if you just ask today. They say that he so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son to suffer on the cross for you and me. No greater love could just one man to give his life for all our sin and suffer all the pain and agony. He did it all that we might be set free. He did it all that we might be set free. He did it all that we might be set free.
Stand up, Gabriel,
Good morning, good morning. What a beautiful, beautiful morning. It's good to see each and every one of you, and we're going to be studying this morning Sunday school, continuing our story of David, 1 Samuel chapter 22. Last week we seen David, and actually we seen Saul and the jealousy and the envy that began in his heart. The evil spirit of God came upon him, and he became very jealous, very envious of David. He heard the ladies coming out and saying Saul has slain his thousands and David has slain his 10,000. And this jealousy, this envy took to the root of Saul's heart, and he tried many times to actually kill David. Threw a javelin at him a couple times, and all these things have led to the our lesson this morning. It gets so bad that David's friend and the son of the king, Jonathan, lets David know. Said, listen, my dad wants you dead. He's going to try to kill you. You got to get away. You got to get away from the palace. You got to get away. So David, we begin our study of David more or less in exile. He takes off, and he goes into the caves in the valley of Elah to hide from Saul. And today's lessons, we're going to see a lot of things that happened during that time. So the jealousy of Saul has caused David to flee. Now, all this enmity, all this jealousy that Saul had was kind of in-house. The people in the palace do it. But now, the enmity, the jealousy, the hatred that Saul had for David is out in the open. And David has to take off. He leaves his family. He leaves everything. He goes out, and he's fleeing from King Saul. And we see that as he flees, there's others that are gathering toward David in support of him. Verse 1 of chapter 22 says, David therefore departed thence and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brethren and all that his father's house heard it, they went down thither to him. And everyone that was in distress, and everyone that was in debt, and everyone that was discontented, gathered themselves unto him, and he became a captain over them. And there were with him about 400 men. So David flees. He takes off. Now, David's going through a terrible time. He is the Lord's anointed. He's the Lord. The Spirit of God is upon him. David is in the Lord's will. But remember, although this is a good life lesson for us, things were not going good for David. Things were extremely difficult for David. There were years where he was running from the king. But in all this, even in the bad time, God was teaching him and preparing him for the kingship, to be his man. Now, we need to remember that. You know, a lot of times in our life, things are not going exactly the way we want them to go. Things might be falling apart all around us. Things might be falling apart in our family. Things might be falling apart at work. But even in those bad times, God is right in the middle of it. Maybe he's doing it all these things are happening for your benefit. We look upon them as things that are, times of persecution, times of tribulation. We look on these things as punishment from God, when in fact they're ways God is preparing us to do something for him, maybe in a little later date. David's going through a tough time. The last thing David probably thought, matter of fact, when David closed his eyes, he's probably thinking, God, what are you doing? I mean, what's going on here? I'm trying. But all this is, all these things David's going through is preparing him for the work that God has him do. And like I said, difficult times in our lives sometimes is God's way of preparing us. Remember that. Now, so all this, matter of fact, David, through all this time, if we read in the Psalms, there's about 8 Psalms that David wrote when he was out on the running from Saul that are wonderful. Psalm 18, 34, 52, 54, 56, 57. All these are David's Psalms while he was running for his life from Saul. But David ran, he flees, and he comes to the cave of Adullam, which was about 20 miles from Jerusalem, in the valley of Elah. And in this valley there were many, many, many natural caves, and David no doubt knew about these caves because they were places often sought out by shepherds and their flock. They would use these caves not only as places to stay themselves, but places of refuge for their flocks when they had them out pasturing. Now, it says that as David is fleeing, then it says here that his brethren, David had all these brothers. He was the youngest of these, I think 7 brothers. But anyway, his brethren and all of his father's house came with David at this time. They heard that David was on the move, and they went and they hid and escaped and went with David into these caves. And they probably had a good reason. Saul was after David, and no doubt Saul was probably using David's family as, they were probably in danger themselves. So they fled also to be with David. And there were others. It says, other than his family, there were others, those who were in distress, those that were in debt, those that were that were discontented or discouraged. Now, that tells me the situation in Israel with Saul as king was becoming very depressed. There were a whole lot of people that were discouraged. There were a whole lot of people that were fleeing, and they were coming to David in hopes of a better future for themselves. Now, in fact, David, and during this time when he's fleeing and he's away from the palace, and during this time of exile, David's popularity among the people continued to grow. Now, verse 3 says, and David went thence to Mizpah of Moab, and he said unto the king of Moab, Let my father and my mother, I pray thee, come forth and be with you, till I know what God will do for me. And he brought them before the king of Moab, and they dwelt with him all the while that David was in the hold, or David was fleeing. Now, Mizpah is in the country of Moab. Now, Moab is an enemy of Israel. Moab had been enemies of Israel, but the word Mizpah, the place where he took, that word means a watchtower. Now, David took his parents, his mom and dad, to Moab, to Mizpah, and brought them to try to keep them safe. That goes to go ahead and back up what I said. His parents, he was worried about his parents. Saul was going, after his family. So he takes his mom and dad to the king of Moab, to Mizpah, and he asks the king there to take care of his mom and dad while he's on the run. Now, this Jesse, his father, had a prosperous place, had all these children, had all these flocks, and so this was a very, for him to leave all that and go to be somewhere else says that his life was in danger. So David takes his mother and his father Jesse to Moab, which I said was an enemy of Israel. But you remember, this takes us all the way back to the story of Ruth and Naomi. Ruth, you know, the kinsman redeemer, Boaz married Ruth, but where was Ruth from originally? Which was the grandma of Jesse, Moab. So they had a connection there with Ruth, Jesse being the grandson of Ruth. So David takes them there, and David said, I want you to take care of them till I know what God will do for me. See, he knew David through all this knew that God was in control, and that he told the king of Moab, just take care of them until I find out, till I know what God's going to do with me and for me. Now, the king of Moab took them in, and the Bible here says they dwelt with him. His mom and dad dwelt with the king of Moab all the while that David was in the hold, or David was on the run. Verse 5 says, and the prophet Gad said unto David, abide not in the hold, depart and get thee into the land of Judah. Then David departed and came into the forest of Hareth. Now, in verse 5, we see the prophet Gad show up. And this prophet, if you look from this time forward, this prophet remains with David throughout his entire life and even his reign as king. Now, David, his advice to David right now was, David, you need to get out of the foreign land where you're hiding, and you need to come back home. You need to come back to Israel. Now, not come back to the palace. You still need to be staying away from Saul, but you need to come back to within Israel's boundaries. He says, abide not in the cave, depart, get thee into the land of Judah. Now, it was Gad's opinion that David would not estrange himself from the country and from his people by remaining in a foreign land. That was good advice that Gad gave him. And David does return back into the land of Judah, the land of Israel, but he's still running from Saul. Now, verse 6, when Saul heard that David was discovered, that David he knew he was back in the land of Israel. When Saul heard that David was discovered, and the men that were with him, now it says, now Saul abode in Gibeah under a tree in Ramah, having his spear in his hand, and all his servants were standing about him. Then Saul said unto his servants that stood about him, hear now, ye Benjamites, will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards, and make you all captains of thousands and captains of hundreds? That all of you have conspired against me, and there is none that showeth me that my son hath made a league with the son of Jesse. And there is none of you that is sorry for me, or showeth unto me that my son hath stirred up my servant against me to lie in wait as at this day. Now, Saul learned of David's return, and at this time, Saul's still in his royal city in Gibeah, and he calls for what we would call here a war council. He calls all his generals, he calls all his men, his cabinet members, and he says this meeting was held under a tree in Ramah. So he gathered all of the leaders of his army, all the ministers of his cabinet, all his captains, and I want you to know something here. This is a lot of the trouble. This is a lot of the reason why there was trouble in Israel. It should note that what he calls it. All of his captains, all of his chosen cabinet members was from his own tribe, Benjamin. It wasn't from, now he was the king of Israel, which included all 12 tribes, but everyone that had a position of authority was from his own tribe of Benjamin, even though he was the king of the whole country. Now, this is kind of like if we had a president from California and he filled all of the posts, everything in the government, all the positions with people from California. Now, that wouldn't be good for the rest of the country. There would be some trouble with that, wouldn't there? And that's exactly what he did. Everybody in his cabinet was from his own tribe, Benjamin. Now, this council that's recorded here is the first one in Israel's history where a council like this goes. And the result of this council, we're going to find out, leads to one of the darkest deeds of all of Saul or anybody in Israel's reign. Now, Saul begins to appeal to his people, and he says, he said, now, I have gave you these positions. Do you think that under David you would enjoy the privileges that you are enjoying now? The people as a whole had already shifted their allegiance to David. And even Saul's worried about his own Benjamites that are absolutely starting, he thinks, because of his jealousy, because of his envy, he thinks they're all against him also. And he starts reminding them of all that he'd done for them. Do you think that if David's king, do you think you'll have these positions? No. And Saul begins to accuse all of them of conspiring against him. He said he is so paranoid that he's now expecting even his own chosen men are against him. And he accuses all these men, and especially his own son Jonathan, of leaning toward this traitor David. And by the way, with Jonathan, he was right. Jonathan is the one who revealed Saul's plan to kill David and got David out of the palace and all this, along with Michal, his wife, which was Saul's daughter. But in verse 9, we're going to see the beginning of a plot that is absolutely horrific. Then answered Doeg the Edomite, which was set over the servants of Saul. This man here was not a captain of the army, was not a leader of, but what he was the head of the servants and over the livestock of the king. And then answered Doeg the Edomite, which was set over the servants of Saul, and said, I saw the son of Jesse, David, going to Nob, to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub. And he inquired of the Lord for him, and gave him victuals, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. Then the king sent to call Ahimelech the priest, and the son of Ahitub, and all his father's house, the priests that were in Nob, and they came all of them to the king. And Saul said, Hear now, thou son of Ahitub. And he answered, Here am I, my lord. And Saul said unto him, Why have ye conspired against me, thou and the son of Jesse, in that thou hast given him bread and a sword, and hast inquired of God for him, that he should rise against me to lie in wait, as at this day? Then Ahimelech answered the king and said, And who is so faithful among all thy servants as David, which is the king's son-in-law, and goeth at thy bidding and honorable in thine house? Did I then begin to inquire of God for him? Be it far from me. Let not the king impute anything unto his servant, nor to all the house of my father, for thy servant knew nothing of all this, less or more. Now, in chapter 1, as David is fleeing from Saul, let's do a little background. As David is fleeing from Saul, he has these men with him. They're very hungry. And David stops at the tabernacle. The tabernacle is here in Nob. The high priest, Ahimelech, and all the priests are there. David goes there, and he asks Ahimelech, the high priest, if he can give him any kind of food. Matter of fact, he wanted the bread. Now, in the tabernacle, if you remember, in the tabernacle, you came and you had this table of showbread, which there were 12 loaves of bread that symbolized the 12 tribes of Israel. These loaves of bread were once a week, they were taken out, replaced, and the old bread was given to the priests. The priests were the only ones allowed to eat this bread. It was reserved for them only. It was holy. So David goes, and he goes to the tabernacle, and he asks the priest, say, listen, we are starving. We're on, and David lied. David lied to Ahimelech, the high priest. He thought he was on a mission from Saul the king. He said, hey, he sprung it on me. I didn't have time to get supplies. I'm out on a mission. He said, can I have some of this bread? And the priest said, man, I can't give you this bread. But anyway, he goes, he goes before the Lord, and Ahimelech, the high priest, gives David the bread, the old bread. And he also, David needs weapons. He also gives him the sword of Goliath that David slew, which should have been David's anyway. He's the one that slew Goliath. But it was there, and he gave him this sword also. And he also, like I said, inquired of the Lord for David. What that means, we're going to find out. He used what they used to make a decision, the Urim and the Thummim, which the priest used to make a decision. But now, Saul accuses him of all this. And as David is in the tabernacle and dealing with this Doeg, the Edomite's also there, and he sees all this. He sees all this happening. So he goes back and he tells the king here at their council. He said, hey, I was there, man. I seen Ahimelech give David this stuff. I seen him do all this thing. So Saul sends for Ahimelech and all the priests to come to this council to answer questions about what he had done. Now, as David asked the priest whatever he could provide, he gave him the consecrated bread, he gave him the sword, and now, here at this council, Doeg speaks up, and he tells about this meeting with David and Ahimelech, the high priest. Now, Saul sends for him 85. The high priest and all the other priests, there were 85 of them that come to this meeting. The entire group. And immediately, Saul accuses Ahimelech of joining with David in a conspiracy against him. Now, Saul says you gave him bread, you gave him a sword, and you inquired of the Lord for him. And this right here, him inquiring of the Lord, him using the Urim Thummim, again, was something that really bothered Saul the most. But Saul's accusation against Ahimelech is completely wrong. It's completely in error. He says David has risen up and conspired against me, which was not true. David had not risen up against Saul. Saul was on the warpath against David. He also accused David of lying in wait for him. Well, no, that was also untrue. David never once, through all his exile, while the king is trying to kill, never once used an offensive move against Saul. It was all defensive. He was always on the run, always hiding. So Ahimelech, the high priest, when he's told all these things, he said, first of all, king, he said, more or less, I don't know what you're talking about. David is the most loyal man I know to you, Saul. As a matter of fact, he's loyal to you. And not only is he loyal to you, he's your family. He's your son-in-law. He says, I've seen David go out and do everything you've ever asked him to do. I've never seen him in any kind of retribution to you. I've only seen David's faithfulness to you. He says he goes and he does anything you've ever asked him to do. He's been obedient to you. I've never seen anything for him to conspire against you. And also, this is very important, when he accuses Ahimelech of going to God on behalf of David, Ahimelech says, oh yeah, I did that, but guess what? That wasn't the first time I've done that. David come to me every time. David come to me several times. I guarantee you, when David, before he went to war, before he went out to battle, he went to Ahimelech and asked the Lord's blessing on what he was doing. Ahimelech said, yeah, I inquired of the Lord. I've done it many times for David. That wasn't the first time I did it. David, why? David possessed the Spirit of God, and that because he possessed the Spirit of God, he wanted to do God's will. By the way, church, we possess the Spirit of God. It ought to cause us to want to do the will of God, what God wants us to do. To Ahimelech, this wasn't any different than any of the other times he came before him. And the final point of Ahimelech's defense, he said, and by the way, I don't know anything about this spat you have with David. He said, I don't know nothing of this conspiracy of which you are speaking. He said, if it's true, I didn't know anything about it. Verse 16, and the king said, thou shalt surely die. Now this is the high priest of Israel, folks. This is the probably the number one position in all the nation. The one that God has anointed high priest through Aaron. I mean, that lineage has continued here. And he says, thou shalt surely die, Ahimelech, thou and all thy father's house. And the king said unto the footmen that stood about him, turn and slay the priest of the Lord, because their hand also is with David, and because they knew when he fled and did not show it to me. But the servants of the king would not put forth their hand to fall upon the priest of the Lord. And the king said unto Doeg, turn thou and fall upon the priest. And Doeg the Edomite turned and fell upon the priest and slew on that day 85 persons, 85 people, 85 priests that did wear a linen ephod. And Nob, the city of the priests, smote he with the edge of the sword, both men and women, children, sucklings and oxen and asses and sheep with the edge of the sword. Now here, Saul hears the high priest. He hears his testimony. And no further proof was sought from Saul. Saul pronounced the death sentence on the high priest, Ahimelech. A sentence that was given in anger and rage and envy and jealousy. The sentence was to Abimelech was a crime he thought deserving of death. But here's the thing. Even at that, even if he was going to pronounce this against the high priest, even if he found him, thought he was guilty, certainly the other 85 priests didn't have anything to do with it. But Saul pronounces a sentence on not only Ahimelech, but all 85. And he turns to his soldiers, he turns to his footmen, and he said, okay, go ahead, I want you to kill them all. And the footmen, to their credit, they knew. They feared God enough to know not to put their hands upon God's priest. When they refused, he turned to Doeg, which was not even an Israelite. He was an Edomite. And he says, you kill him. And Doeg took the sword, and one by one, starting no doubt with the high priest, starting at the high, no, with one by one, went in and cut and killed with the sword all 85 of God's priests. And not only that, it gets much worse. The city of Nob, where the priests lived, where their wives and their children and their cattle, all this stuff was, they went into the city and killed every wife, daughter, son, daughter, baby, oxen, everything. Completely destroyed the whole city. And this was all happened because somebody was falsely accused of something. You ever been falsely accused of something? I want you to think, you know, those times where you've been, and at times in our life, maybe all of us have been falsely accused of something. But here, Saul, the king, he falsely accused David. He falsely accused the high priest, Ahimelech. I want you to think of falsely accused people in the Word of God. Paul, the Apostle Paul, was falsely accused of being an enemy of the state. But most of all, our Lord Jesus was falsely accused. So Janet, all the rest of you've been falsely accused in your life for something, you're in good company. You're in real good company. Now, verse 20. Verse 20, and one of the sons of the high priest, one of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. And Abiathar showed David that Saul had slain the Lord priest. Now, I don't know how he made it, but there was one of the sons of Ahimelech, whether he was back at the tabernacle fulfilling the duties of the priest, or somebody had to stay back, no doubt. But whatever the situation was, he escaped and he went and he found David and he told David everything that happened. David, when he heard this news, was absolutely shook deep within his heart. And David said, verse 22, look, and David said unto Abiathar, I knew it that day when Doeg the Edomite was there, that he would surely tell Saul, I have occasioned the death of all the persons of thy father's house. What did David do? David, when he was there, he knew, he seen the Doeg the Edomite there, and he knew when he said in his mind, he said, I knew when I seen him that he was going to go tell Saul, and I did it anyway. He said, as a matter of fact, that little lie David told, the priest, he got all of them killed. And David's living. David said, I caused every one of their deaths. I caused every one of these deaths because of what I did. His grief, of this tragedy, it's cut him very, very deep. The son of Ahimelech, which is Abiathar right here, he's the one that went and he told David. Okay, yeah, he does. He takes the position of the high priest. And if you'll notice from this time on, Abiathar he's with David, though, from the beginning of his reign all the way through the end of his life. Abiathar is there with David. Right here in verse 23, David tells him, Abide thou with me, fear not, for he that seeketh my life seeketh thy life, but with me thou shalt be safeguarded. Now, Abiathar, as I said, he became the high priest after his father's death and all the other priests. He occupied from this time a very, very important spot in David's life. Throughout most of David's reign, Abiathar here remained faithful and a trusted friend to David. And David made a very, very sincere apology to Abiathar. He said, I knew it when I seen him there. I knew that in the heart of Doeg he would go and he would take this news to King Saul. He said, I have occasioned the death of all these people in your father's house. I'm so sorry. Now, David, would you consider David a good man? Would you consider Abiathar a good man? Would you consider Ahimelech the high priest a good man? Sure. And here's the age-old question we ask all the time. Why do bad things happen to good people? We ask that when we see child of God, when we see people that are good people going through tragedy in their life. Folks, don't get me wrong. I've asked it before. I know you have. Why do bad things happen to good people? Anybody got the answer to that? Rains upon the just and the unjust. Exactly. Now, and folks, why do bad things happen? just because bad things happen to good people, just because a person is good, just because a person is good, just because a person is godly, just because a person is living in the center of God's will does not mean that God in his providence, remember, God sees today, he's seeing tomorrow, he's seeing down the future. All these things does not mean that God is not going to permit bad things to happen to you. As I said before, folks, listen to me. When bad things start happening to children of God, the first thing we say, man, you're not there. Something that evidently they must not be living right. Not necessarily true, folks. Not necessarily true. God in his providence, and as I said, God uses these bad things that happen to us just to prepare us. Maybe these things are happening just to prepare us for something in the future. Now, as I said, look at all the things that happened to some of the good people. Look at what happened to the disciples of Jesus Christ. All except John were absolutely martyred. They were murdered. What happened to the greatest that we know, the greatest, we'll call him one of the greatest Christians ever, Paul? You don't think bad things happened to him? Oh my goodness. More than anybody could ever imagine. Yes, and it does. And all these things happen, and that's why when these bad things are happening to us in our Christian life, when these bad things are happening in our life, we need to stand forth, and as Sally said, how we handle these things lets us, other people know more about our God than anything in the good times will. And Kathy, that's one thing we forget. We have got to remember, God promised us, all things work, the bad things, the good, all things work together for the good. All things work together to them that love God. Folks, if you love God, if you're doing his will, everything that happens in your life, bad and good, is all for good. All for your good. Now, a lot of times we don't understand that, but we got to count on it. All things work together for good. Saul, all this began, and I'm finishing up. All this began, as we talked about last week, all this began with jealousy. That's why jealousy is not only a sin, by the way, it's a sin that can absolutely blacken the hearts of individuals and cause them to do things they would never ever think about doing. Saul's jealousy ended up taking the lives of 85 of God's priests. One of the darkest times in Israel's history started out with jealousy. But all these bad things that's going on in David's life, we need to keep in mind that during all these years, and by the way, it's years, it's not months, it's not time. Hey, through years David was running from Saul. And through all these years, from the time that Samuel anointed David, the youngest son of Jesse, the one that Jesse said it can't be, but yeah, it was him because he had a heart for God that nobody else seen. From the time that Samuel anointed David until he took the throne as king of Israel, all those years, God had David in training. Bad times, good times. He put him in palace. He started him out. He put him in the palace. He was seeing things, both good and bad, that was going to help him. He had that relationship with the prince, Jonathan, that was also part of his learning experience. David was learning both positive and negatively from the Saul on how to run a kingdom. Learning to do what to do and knowing not what to do. But the main thing, and I know the thing that this lesson was trying to get across to us more than anything else, folks, listen to me. Just because you're going through bad times, just because you're going through tribulation, just because you're going through trial, just because life is falling apart does not mean that you're not in God's will. It doesn't mean God is not preparing you for something that's out there in front. Thank you for your prayers and attention. Mabel.